Tier list for each and every arc in the series. We're going to be going over my favorite, my least favorite, why I think they're in that place, S, A, B, C. Let's do all of it after that intro. Hit it! So where are we going to start off in this list of My Hero Academia arcs? It sucks that this isn't exactly in order on here, but I guess it's also going to be a test of how well we remember the order of the arcs, right? So we're going to start off. First arc we're going to do in this list, we're going to be ranking the USJ arc, right? Let's see. USJ. That's the arc where we have all the students going against Shigaraki for the first time in the USJ Center. All Might comes at the end. That's where we have the battle between the USJ Nomu, is what it's affectionately been called in the series, versus All Might. And that's kind of like what put the series on the map in a very, very big way, right? I wouldn't say it's like a record-breaking, award-winning arc in a shonen, you know what I mean? It got across all the themes and all the values that it had to. But for what it was, especially in a shonen that became like as massive as it is in My Hero Academia, and for an introductory arc, I feel like it did all the things that it had to do, and there was never really any point that I was bored necessarily. I mean, they had a lot of work to do to introduce a bunch of the students, getting Deku in school, getting his quirk, right? Then all the USJ battles, and you finally get to USJ. There was a little bit of a build-up, right? But it all, when you're first reading it for the first time, getting entrenched in the world of My Hero Academia isn't really that hard, because I feel like the series does a good job at kind of holding your hand to a certain extent and getting you into at least the shallow waters, right, before you have to really start delving in and going crazy theorizing like I have. Right now, I'm going to stay neutral and put USJ at a B. Moving on from that, we have the Sports Festival. Now, with the Sports Festival, that is where a lot of people started reading or watching My Hero Academia, right? Specifically, when the Sports Festival was animated for My Hero Academia Season 2, I mean, we could just go on and on and on about the standout moments there, right? There's Deku versus Shoto, Bakugo versus Ochako, Bakugo versus Shoto, as short as that was. All sorts of great moments. The introduction of Shinso, various different concepts that were introduced into the series at that point. It's one of the first times that we saw Deku actually go crazy with breaking his bones and doing all that sort of stuff and being actually pretty raw. One of the only times that we actually saw that in the series. This is also way back before we ever knew anything about the multiple quirk thing going on of Deku, but it is seeded here originally in the series. And yeah, I think universally this is marked as a very, very big high point in the series for a lot of fans of My Hero Academia, whether they're anime fans or manga only fans. So I'm going to be placing the Sports Festival arc. I got to place it higher than USJ, right? So when you look at this whole tier list at the end and you're like, some of these don't make sense, I'm definitely comparing them to the last thing that I put there, right? So if I think USJ is a B, I would definitely put Sports Festival above USJ, I would say. So immediately following the Sports Festival arc, we have a very, very tight arc with the Stain arc, right? Now in that arc, we saw, I mean, a number of things going on. We were introduced to the hero killer Stain, whose plot, I don't really know where it's gone in the series as of late, to be honest. There was a moment where he came back with All Might and all that stuff, and it seemed like stuff was going to go down. But Stain is kind of TBD, right? He's nowhere to be found at the moment. But back then, during the Stain arc, I mean, Stain, a lot of people thought was going to be one of the best villains in My Hero Academia. I mean, a lot of people will still argue that that's one of the best villains in My Hero Academia, and I like that Stain's kind of personal issue that he has in the series very, very much hits home. I mean, technically he is right about the current hero society to a certain extent. It's just the way that he's going about taking care of it and handling it is definitely the wrong way to do things, you know what I mean? And I also like that Stain's whole, like, enemy isn't necessarily the main character, Deku, in this arc, right? Like, Stain has beef, really the other way around. Ida has beef with Stain for something that Stain did with his brother, right? And it was very, very awesome for me to see, like, kind of the class president, sort of like bigger brother of the class, get angry, actually, and kind of start turning up and trying to look for Stain and, like, thinking about what he was going to do in that situation, you know what I mean? I feel like it's great to have Ida, who's one of the most, like, straight and narrow characters in the class, being the person to do that. And obviously, having Todoroki and Deku working together immediately after the events of the Sports Festival was very, very impactful, showing that friendship starting to grow before they start becoming part of the main trio along with Bakugo in the series. So I really enjoyed the Stain arc. I think in the anime, the finishing move on Stain could have been animated a little better, honestly. That's always been a criticism of mine that I've had. But I do think the Stain arc, you got to put that up there. A almost S. I might come back and look at that again and put it in S, because the Stain arc is just a very, very great arc in My Hero Academia. You have like Shigaraki and Stain's interactions, Stain's whole interaction with Endeavor and everyone, the Nomu attacks. Like, for a very short arc, a lot of stuff actually happened in that arc, and I feel like it was handled very, very well across the manga and the anime. So we might even move that up to S, but for now we're going to keep Stain in the A territory. So now we're going to move on to the next arc in My Hero Academia. I believe it took place after the Stain arc. Honestly, my memory of this arc isn't all that great. It's going to be the teacher versus student arc, right? Or I guess the final exams is what a lot of people end up calling it. This arc, I'm not a big fan of like the action in this arc, right? But I'm a very, very big person when it comes to like the narrative of My Hero Academia, and I will say this was a very, very good arc for the narrative of My Hero Academia, right? One, it's obviously Horikoshi trying to use a bunch of the students to kind of show you, hey, these students aren't nameless nobodies and meaningless, and like, you know, I'm going to continue to try to use them and push them in the series, which we see is a thing that continues on as the series goes on. But definitely the person who gets some of the biggest shine in this arc in general is Momo Yaoyorozu, right? Yaoyorozu has her whole section of her, Shoto, and Aizawa kind of dealing with some of the problems that have been bubbling over with her character over the course of the series. And next to that, you have all the stuff going on of Grape Rush, right, for Mineta and his little character development. And you also have kind of the beginnings of some sort of proper rivalry between Deku and Bakugo, right, as they both fight All Might. And they kind of both have to, like, acknowledge each other and what the other is capable of and what they could lend to a team fight, right, if they work together against an opponent who's just overwhelmingly powerful, right, which I do think is a theme we're going to return to later on in the series, even if Bakugo actually is gone, you know what I mean? But I definitely think for this arc, as much as I want to place narrative importance on, like, you know what, I can't say it's much worse than USJ. Let me think. No, USJ has the Nomu versus All Might fight, though, so I am going to have to put the final exam arc in a C right now. So right now, so far, our score is we have the USJ arc at B, we have Sports Festival at A, Stain arc at A, and the Teacher versus Student arc, or the final exam arc, as a C currently. But it's a high-ranking C. I just don't really see it making sense, no pun intended, for me to put it in the same level as USJ, right, when it has the All Might versus Nomu fight, and that's just far and away better than anything that happens in the Teacher versus Students arc. From here, we're going to move on to one of the more interesting arcs in My Hero Academia. At least it leads up to one of the most interesting arcs in My Hero Academia, and that is going to be the forest training section of the story, right? That's where we have the students going away to a secret training location, right? And the introduction, properly the introduction of the League of Villains, right? That's the first time we see Dabi, really, Toga, Muscular, a lot of very important characters that we're going to see later on in the series. Twice, Compress. It's kind of like the establishing arc for the League of Villains in My Hero Academia, and I feel like what a entrance they made, you know what I mean? Terrorizing the students, Mustard with his mustard gas, never to be seen again, Dabi burning everything down, Twice going crazy and having a cool moment with his Twice clone against Aizawa where he makes like a Dabi Twice clone, the beginning of like Toga and Ochako's character arcs. I just feel like it's a really, really good arc for what it is. And of course, in this same arc, we have two very, very standout moments for me, which one is Tokoyami going berserk in the forest, right, against Moonfish. That really, really shows the capabilities that Tokoyami has and really, really kind of teases what he's capable of later on in the series as he takes characters like Redestro down in one hit. And also, of course, Deku versus Muscular, right? One of the best fights in the entire series, one of the most emotional, one of just the most action-packed and like high-stakes battles in the entire series, and it's Deku doing it all by himself, right? It's one of Deku's first proper fights against a villain, and yeah, this arc, I might, oh man. You know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to put the Forest Training arc in the S tier. You can't tell me anything. It has Muscular versus Deku in it. Like, it's still one of the best fights in My Hero Academia to this day, so we're going to put it in the S tier. And immediately following the Forest Training arc, of course, we had the Kamino War Dark, or the All Might versus All for One kind of battle. That gets separated into its own little section. And, I mean, first off, that's obviously going in S-Class, right? I mean, you had all the craziness between Bakugo getting captured, the students setting up the plan to go save Bakugo, the execution of the plan, the introduction of All for One, the battle between All for One and All Might, right? Saving Bakugo. All that stuff, the reveal that Shigaraki was actually Nana's grandson, right? I mean, there's just so much packed into this small section of the story, right, that it's really hard to believe how Horikoshi was able to do all of that and then do the All Might versus All for One fight, right? Which was obviously voted by people to be the best anime fight of the year that year when it was animated. I don't necessarily agree because I feel like a lot of the fight is like, it's just kind of one punch, right? You know what I mean? It's not really that much of a fight. But from the emotional weight and all the stuff that kind of like lends to a fight, right? And adds to a fight, that carried it so hard that it made it the best fight of the year, even if it was literally a fight that was just a couple punches and not really that much going on. It still lifted it to that level, and that's something that I feel like, as a My Hero Academia fan, we're never going to forget until the end of the series and beyond, right? The whole All Might versus All for One section of the story, it's just going to have to go down as an iconic piece of history. Next up, we're going to be going over one of my honestly least favorite arcs in the entire series. I feel like this arc, the only saving grace, honestly, is that it planted a lot of like hints for the Aoyama traitor theory, right? That I held on to for a long time in the series. But I really don't even want to talk about this arc, so we're just going to go and put the Class 1A versus Shiketsu joint training arc. It's not joint training. Joint training I like. It's the provisional license exam. We're just going to throw that in the D and forget that it even exists. Let's just not talk about that. Because immediately after that, we have an arc that pretty much everyone, at least at one point, agreed was one of My Hero Academia's best arcs, right? I mean, a long time ago, this was what people would tell you was just flat out My Hero Academia's best arc, and that is going to be the Overhaul arc. Now, say what you will about what they did to the Overhaul arc in the anime, I feel like this arc is still like a masterful example of what Horikoshi is capable of, but also a great example of some things that he struggled with, especially early on in the series, and that was definitely kind of dealing with longer arcs, how to resolve them, cleaning everything up. We've seen Horikoshi kind of struggle with that as the course of the series has gone on, but this arc is very, very important for, you know, introducing Eri, the Quirk Rewind, Mirio, the Big Three, you know, Overhaul, all that stuff going on. Shigaraki's character really evolved into his own villain in some respects in this arc, right? Where he started doing kind of his own operations after the capture of All for One, right? And started becoming really his own person, right? And learning from the different villains that he's come up against, like Stain and now in this arc, Overhaul, right? So that's not even to speak of the massive battle that is 100% Deku versus Overhaul. That was incredible. In the manga, the battle between Mirio and Overhaul was also incredible. Red Riot Kirishima versus Rappa along with Fat Gum, right? I mean, there was a lot of really standout moments in this arc, and then you also have the whole backstory with All Might and Night Eye and kind of Night Eye's death, and there's just a lot going on. Like many arcs in My Hero Academia, we're going to keep saying there's a lot going on in a lot of these different little arcs that we put up here. I'm going to put it in the A tier, right? Because it's not the best of the best. I almost want to put it B, but I definitely don't think it's any worse than the Stain arc. So we're going to leave it in the A category. Because even with the 100% Deku and all that stuff, it doesn't really put it in the higher echelon, right? Because the anime and the manga both have their own individual issues with this arc. So immediately following the Overhaul arc, we have My Hero Academia's Cultural Fest arc, right, or Cultural Fest arc, where pretty much the entire goal is to save Eri again, right? We saved Eri physically by getting her away from the dangerous people and dangerous things that are around her, and now what we're going to do is save her spirit, right, by making her happy like she's supposed to be and showing her that the world is a good place and you can have a good time and not have to be seen as like a tool or a quirk that has to be used in a certain way, right? So Culture Festival isn't necessarily that long. I know a lot of people bag on it for being like following a very, very tense arc and then being like an arc that goes right back into school stuff and kind of fluffy feelings and stuff like that. But I definitely think it is a very, very much needed slice of life arc. And it's one of the last major, I believe it might even be the last major slice of life arc we ever got in the series, right? Kind of the biggest focus on anything going on in the school outside of the joint training arc and all the stuff that's going on right now. So I do appreciate the focus on Jiro, the focus on all of the class coming together. It's really where the class starts to feel like one big cohesive unit. And also you got to talk about Gentle and Labrava's presence in the story, right? Showing kind of another side to what a villain can be, right? And making us question, like, what is a villain really? You know what I mean? Kind of getting to the very beginning of that question, because the whole series we're questioning what is a hero, and this arc very, 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 very much, at least for me, made me start questioning what is a villain, right? Like, is it so black and white? Is there a world full of gray out there where people can be saved? And we do see that Gentle is saved, right? And Labrava is saved thanks to Deku. And also, this is another one of those solo Deku fights against a villain. Everything was on his shoulders, right? And I think he handled it very, very well. So we're going to take the Culture Festival arc, even though I did very, very much so enjoy the gentle stuff, and I really, really enjoyed the performance and everything. Still, it was placed a little weirdly. I wish it was like, I don't know, it's hard to say that I wish it was placed somewhere else, but I don't know, something about it makes me want to put it in the B category. Now, coming off the heels of My Hero Academia's Culture Festival, we obviously have a very, very surprising arc, right? It kind of came out of nowhere, but once it got started, we knew things were about to start changing in the world of My Hero Academia, and that, of course, is the Endeavor, the Pro Heroes arc, right? Otherwise known as the Endeavor arc. Very, very, very short arc. It must have been like 5 or 6 chapters or something like that. It was very short, but that's where we got kind of the world of My Hero Academia opening up in a very, very big way, right? We got introduced to the top 10 heroes. Endeavor officially became the #1 hero. We got introduced to Hawks. Dabi started making moves and plans on how he was going to reveal himself eventually in the war arc. We saw Endeavor versus the Hayanomu, which is still probably the best fight in all of My Hero Academia's anime, right? It has not been topped yet as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know if it will be in My Hero Academia Season 6 unless they really, really go off. I mean, there's potential for certain things to top that fight, but I don't know what will, right? We have to really see how the anime is going to come pushing when it comes back. But the Endeavor Pro Hero arc, that obviously is going to go into S-Class, right? That's very, very short and sweet. It does everything that it needs to do. I don't really see any flaws with it because of that, because of how short it is. It does everything that it has to do, right? And it's really, really awesome. So clearly, that has to go into the S rank right next to All Might versus All for One, right? Which is kind of like a longer version of that kind of arc. And I think it's really thematically appropriate that we have Deku solo fight against Muscular, All Might solo fight against All for One, and Endeavor solo fight against the Hayanomu, all in the S tier. I guess that kind of tells you how much of a meathead I secretly am. Now, right after the Endeavor arc, or the Pro Heroes arc, or whatever you want to call it, we have the Joint Training arc, right? And now I know the Joint Training arc, it was definitely the point where a lot of people stopped reading, if I remember correctly, back during the My Hero Academia manga days, right? Because you have like the heights of the Pro Hero arc and everything like that. Things were kind of building after the Culture Festival, and then you go right back into student stuff, right? And it kind of felt like the stakes were being raised in My Hero Academia during the Pro Heroes arc, and then they were being immediately lowered again because we had all this student versus student stuff going on where we knew no one was really going to get hurt and there was no villains, and if the villains did jump in again, it would be redundant. So it just kind of was like, why is this arc here? But I will say this arc did introduce, you know, the multi-quirk Deku situation. It reintroduced Shinso back into the story, and we did actually get some pretty good matches between the Class 1A and Class 1B students, especially when it comes to the anime, right? I think they really, really did a good job at least fleshing that arc out, right? After doing what they did to every other arc in that season of the anime. It's very good at the very least that they did apply a decent amount of focus and care and love into this section of the story when they animated it, right? And we got a lot of intimate character moments, and we got a lot of like well done character moments between certain characters, and like a lot of development and a lot of growth that is kind of slowly been building over the course of the series, but came to a head during this arc, right? And it's perfectly placed, I think. But I think considering everything that happens after it, there's no better place to put it, right? Which is why I'm angry about how the anime handles everything in My Hero Academia, because they don't move where this arc is, but they move the arcs that happen immediately after it, right? And it it really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So for the Joint Training arc, I'm gonna go ahead and put that, if you asked me this when it came out, I might have put it in the D with the provisional license exam, but because of like the sheer amount of things that have come from this arc, right, and kind of the seeds that were sprouted from this arc finally coming to fruition as we get later on in the series, I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the B category, because, you know, I feel like at the very least it's better than provisional license exam and the final exam. But I don't know, all the exam-y kind of sections of the story are in this bottom 3 section of the tier list, right? So that you could just take from that what you will. Now, in the anime for My Hero Academia, after this arc, we have the Endeavor training arc, right? But in the manga, what we ended up getting was My Villain Academia, right? Which is one of My Hero Academia's best arcs still to this day. Just 100% villain-focused arc, very rarely and or never done before in the history of Shonen Jump, right? A lot of people were like, what is this? You can't do this in Japan. And it was kind of shocking to a lot of the audience in Japan from what I remember. Very, very well done arc. I mean, you get focus on every single member of the League of Villains to a certain extent. You get less so on Compress and less so on Dabi, but it's because Horikoshi knows that he has moments planned for those characters later on, right? Like, you have some hints towards the whole Dabi thing. You got the uncovering of him having a quirk that's not really good for his body, which we didn't know beforehand. necessarily, right? I mean, you see all the burns and everything on his body, or the scars, but we didn't exactly know that he was just burning himself, right, in a way that was unstoppable. You just thought maybe Dabi was a little crazy. And for Compress, you don't get much, but we do end up getting stuff for Compress later, and he kind of does make it a point to say, hey, what about me? You know what I mean? Where's my moment here, more or less, in the arc, which I did think was very comical. But aside from that, I mean, the big hitters in this arc are obviously going to be Twice, Toga, and Shigaraki, right? Each having their own awakening in their own moment, from Twice discovering that he's the original Twice and going Sad Man's Parade and kind of having his entire mood shift and kind of tone change that he has in this arc, to Toga realizing that she's able to use Ochako's quirks, right? And the quirks of people that she loves, which is a very, very dangerous development, especially when paired with what happened to Twice earlier in the arc. And then finally, to top it all off, you have Shigaraki going absolutely nuts of the reveal of Shigaraki's actual backstory this late in the series, by the way. I mean, a lot of series will give you the villain's backstory pretty early on, or like at the very end when they're getting like dealt with by the main character. But here we get it, and Deku's not even anywhere nearby to learn anything about this backstory, right? It's specifically for us, the audience, and for, to a certain extent, for Redestro and people to know, right? I mean, they don't know the full details. There's no better way to end this arc than the way that it was ended. I did not see it coming that Shigaraki was going to take over the Meta Liberation Army, right? I didn't know how they were going to beat all these guys. Maybe Makia and this and that was going to do whatever. But, I mean, having Redestro have an ideology that is very, very long stressed and long built into his character over the course of this arc in the history of My Hero Academia, having him have an ideology and then seeing Shigaraki become the perfect personification of that ideology, right? And then giving all his power to him, that's just raw. That's the rawest thing ever. So My Villain Academia, of course, not surprisingly, is going to go in the S tier for all the different arcs in My Hero Academia. It's still one of the best arcs in My Hero Academia. And after this, I mean, we just have heat after heat after heat after heat. Speaking of heat, of course, we have the Endeavor training arc. That's where we see Bakugo, Shoto, and Deku kind of like actually forming themselves as the main trio in the series by this point, right? And going to work with Endeavor, who's the #1 hero right now. Obviously, he's probably one of the best people for any of them to learn under. You're never going to get this chance again. You might as well take this training, right? And in this arc, it was very, very much a keeping up with the Todoroki's arc, kind of setting up the events of what was going to happen in the war arc that is to come immediately after this arc. But great moments of the Todoroki family and Endeavor, great moments of Bakugo and Deku kind of witnessing all the stuff that's going on in that household, and then obviously all the like great training moments between them and Endeavor that is really like what I envisioned when I was getting into My Hero Academia, right? That we were going to be seeing students alongside heroes in the field, learning, getting first-rate advice. This arc kind of scratched that itch for me that I wasn't getting for the duration of the series up until this point. And I feel like if we had more stuff like this, like I know we have the internships and stuff like that, but I feel like if we had more stuff like this throughout the series, it would feel a lot more like what I was expecting My Hero to be like, right? So for that reason, I definitely think the Endeavor training arc is one of my favorite arcs in My Hero Academia, and I'm gonna place it, I believe, in the A tier because, you know, I mean, it's not really on the same level as Overhaul versus Deku, like in that sense, but in the sense that it gave me what I actually wanted from the series more than any other arc, really. I have to put it in the A tier just for that, right? Because it kind of changes the series in its own way, and it changes it into something that I like a lot more than what we had before. So following the Endeavor training arc in My Hero Academia, that's kind of where we ended off, or where we should have ended off, I guess, last season. We have My Hero Academia's War Arc, one of the longest arcs in My Hero Academia. I mean, where do you start? You have the heroes going against the villains, surprising them, all sorts of ridiculous battles that go on. I feel like, honestly, if you ask me, it could have been a lot more, but we know Horikoshi struggles with expanding arcs too far, right? So I feel like he did effectively get all the things that he wanted to get done in this arc, as far as kind of bringing all the plot lines that were built up to that point to not an end, but like a good early climax, right? Before getting to the final kind of stage that we're in right now in the series. But the War Arc, I mean, you have Deku versus Shigaraki, obviously. The whole Deku and Bakugo versus Shigaraki section, Shigaraki versus Endeavor, Shigaraki destroying the lab, Mirko in the lab. I mean, not to spoil the entirety of Season 6 of My Hero Academia, pretty much. A lot happening, and a lot of villains and heroes fighting, and it's a lot of it is very, very peak, and I'm hoping that it gets drastically expanded on in the anime, right? Like, we're all wondering to see how they're going to animate this arc in the first place in the anime, because there's just so much stuff that Horikoshi does that, looking at My Villain Academia and how that was treated, it's just like, well, this arc is that turned up to like 1,000,000, you know what I mean? So how are you going to get to that point? And speaking of 1,000,000, it's also where you see Mirio come back into the story, right? In a way that not a lot of people thought was the best, myself included. But I feel like this arc sets up a lot of stuff that kind of is going to be very, very relevant in this final arc, or was relevant immediately after in the Dark Deku arc, or the arc where Deku leaves UA. The whole fusing of Shigaraki and All for One, like, there's just a lot of good in this arc and not a lot of bad, honestly, looking back on it and from what I can remember. There's a couple sections that I don't think are the greatest, right? Like, personally, I think we could have seen a lot more of what was going on in the mansion raid, right? I mean, we did focus quite a bit on the whole Makia escape section, but what a great arc to see all the students work together, Class 1B students actually being useful, Deku versus Shigaraki, again, I'm going to mention that 10 times because it's really, really awesome, and Deku's rage moment over Bakugo. A heavy, heavy hitter of an arc, and it's definitely purposefully going to have to be in the A tier. I don't think it's necessarily an S-class arc. It's not an S, in my opinion. I think there are ways that it could have been better, but I am going to put it in the A tier, and it's very, very close to an S. It's leaning to an S. Maybe by the end of the video, I'll change my mind, but for now, we're going to put it in the A tier. Even though, nah, never mind, I changed my mind. I remember Shigaraki's dream and Aizawa cutting off his leg and all the other crazy stuff that happened in this arc. The bodies, yeah, we're going to have to put that in the S tier. People are just going to have to deal with it. So, moving on from that, immediately after the My Hero Academia War Arc, we have the events of the, I mean, there's 500 names for this arc, right? The Villain Hunt Arc, the Dark Deku Arc, the Deku Black Arc, the Deku Rescue Arc. I mean, there's a lot of different names, but pretty much it's the arc that happens after Deku leaves UA, right? As a result of all the things going on immediately after the War Arc, right? Like the prison breaks and the knowledge that Shigaraki at any point could just come after Deku using search and find out where he is, so that puts everyone around him in immediate danger. Now, this is one of my favorite arcs in My Hero Academia, even though I hate the resolution of how this arc went. I don't like it. I don't like how a lot of things were set up. A lot of drama was set up between Deku and All Might that was unresolved, or resolved, I guess, in a really, really corny way. And just, I feel like a lot of the stuff that this arc did was kind of scrubbed away to a certain extent. I mean, in some cases, literally, right? Because once Deku had that bath with all the other students, that was kind of it for a lot of the stuff. There are great implications for the other students in UA and the other students in Deku's class, and showing like that they've really, really learned from him over the course of the time that Deku has spent together with them at UA, and they've really, really bonded and kind of become this one big cohesive unit who can even set Deku on the right path, right, when he's not doing the right thing. Yeah, I feel like the very end of that arc always is going to leave a bad taste in my mouth, no matter how great Deku versus Muscular was. Deku versus Lady Nagant being an amazing battle, but the editor cutting it short because he wanted to, like, save space, and us not getting a lot of Nagant's backstory, right? Like, there's just some issues that I have with this arc that aren't necessarily based in the arc, and there's issues that I have with it that are based in the arc, right? So as amazing as seeing Dark Deku was, and the mask and the art was just taking it to different levels every week, Horikoshi seemed like he was drawing like a demon, right? Like, I feel like this is a lot of where Horikoshi's inspiration to do a horror manga comes from, because he saw, like, oh, I'm putting so much black on the page and so many like hatch lines and doing all this stuff. It's really, really fun drawing this way. As taxing as it is, as much as I probably feel like Deku right now, this is awesome. I want to do this more, and I could probably do it more if I do a horror series, right? So I'm going to take the Dark Deku arc, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. It's not S tier. It could have been S tier if it was like 10 chapters longer. We got into a little more. We didn't skip over all those battles that Deku had, like the battle versus the giant sea monster that I would have loved to see Deku take on. Like, I feel like this arc was kind of like a training montage for Deku, right, to a certain extent. And I don't know. I feel like if you were going to do a training montage arc, it should have been not shorter, I guess. Maybe it should have been longer, but I guess that flies in the face of what I'm about to say about this next arc, because, oh, buddy, let's just throw this right in the A tier, like all the other great fights in the series, or the S tier, I guess is what I mean. We have the Star and Stripes versus Shigaraki section of the story, another short and sweet arc, just like the Endeavor versus Haya Nomu arc, where we have the #1 hero from America coming over to Japan to pretty much try and meet up with All Might or meet up with Deku and One for All and whoever to give them like some sort of help in this battle against Shigaraki All for One. And here, after not seeing Shigaraki since the end of the War Arc, right, and having this whole arc where Deku was to himself, it was really, really nice to have another arc pretty much led from a villain-centric perspective, right, giving us Shigaraki all by himself without any of the League members or anyone there to help him, besides All for One in his head, taking down probably the strongest hero we've seen in the entire series thus far, right? Like, Star and Stripe definitely would have had trouble with All Might, right? But that's kind of the only person I could see her having trouble with when her quirk is as broken as it is. And maybe even there's an argument that Star and Stripe and All might have been a good fight, honestly. Like, maybe she could have actually won. As ridiculous as All Might is, her quirk is just, like, bonkers. It just doesn't really make any sense, honestly. But it made for an amazing fight. Star and Stripe and her pilots in America, they all kind of fought Shigaraki. And even though it ended up in Star and Stripe losing her life, we learned a lot about, like, how Shigaraki could potentially be taken down, what's going on with his mental state. The battle was raw, the giant cloud version of Star and Stripe coming down. I mean, it's the biggest scale fight that we have in My Hero Academia so far, right? So obviously, it's gonna go #1 in this tier listing. I'm sorry, but it's gonna go #1 and it has to be. And for anyone who thinks it should be anything lower, shame on you. And that brings us to the most current arc in the My Hero Academia manga, what is known as the final arc in My Hero Academia, the final war between the heroes and the villains. And so far in this arc, we've had a number of things happen, from the traitor reveal, like Aoyama being the traitor, all the battles happening on all the different battlefields, kind of like the final arc mimicking the first arc with USJ, right, where they pretty much use the USJ strategy to separate all the villains using portals into different areas that would be best to fight against them in. I just feel like I love almost everything about this arc, and the stakes feel real, and like people are getting injured, and it's not injuries that are going to easily heal, you know what I mean? Jiro's lost part of her ear and part of her face. Endeavor's lost an arm, and you know, who knows what's going to happen to him in a second when All for One gets his face reveal. You have Hawks losing all of his wings. You have Bakugo getting like shredded apart and possibly dying. I mean, even Nejire getting hurt. Everyone is getting hurt very, very bad in this arc, and I feel like it's going to lead to some pretty massive character deaths, or at least some like Deku losing an arm or something like of that level, right? So this is the end of the series. This is when Horikoshi gets to take all the gloves off and everything and kind of just do all the things he's been wanting to do, get rid of all the characters that he's been wanting to get rid of. But I'm going to place the current arc. So far, it's shaping up to be an S, but we have to see if Hori sticks some landings, right? Specifically, the whole Bakugo thing, the All for One, One for All plot line, how the quirk singularity is going to be resolved, how the Dabi storyline is going to be resolved and everything. So I could put this anywhere up here, not in B. I could put this anywhere in these two, but right now I'm going to put it in the A class to be a little safe, because the arc's not over, right? We can't really judge the final arc until it's final and finished and all done. So as of right now, I want to give it an A. I want to give it an S, honestly, but as of right now, I'm going to give it an A because we just don't know if Horikoshi is going to stick the landing. I do think it's going to end up being one of My Hero Academia's longest arcs, if not the longest arc period, right? Especially since this is the final portion of the series. But yeah, that's where I'm going to put the final arc of My Hero Academia. And here it is, a completed arc tier list of My Hero Academia, the My Hero Academia arc tier list, starting from beginning to end. In D, we have the provisional license exam. In C, we have the final exams. In B, we have USJ, Culture Festival, and Joint Training. In A, we have the Sports Festival, Stain Arc, Overhaul Arc, Endeavor Training, Dark Deku Arc, and the current arc that we're in right now. And in S, we have Deku versus Muscular, of course, the Forest Training, All Might versus All for One, Kamino Arc, Endeavor versus the High-End Nomu in the Pro Heroes arc, My Villain Academia makes perfect sense, the previous War arc, which I do think shaped up to be an S, and Star and Stripe versus Shigaraki, which was very short, very sweet and condensed, and did everything that I had to do. So, let me know if you agree or disagree with my tier list. I'm going to put a link to it. I believe you can just do it yourself, right? So please share on Twitter. Let me know what you guys have for your tier list, what arcs you guys have, in which order. You could also just put it in the comment section below. And yeah, that's what I think is going on with the series as far as the quality of every arc. Let me know if you think I'm crazy. Let me know if you think we're exactly alike, and I'll see you guys later. It's Pineapple. Peace.